game-changing discussions on the big ideas that shape our thinking. This is One-to-One.
Professor Eghosa Osaghae is the Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, Nigeria's foreign policy think tank. He is a political scientist and academic of international repute and former Vice-Chancellor of the Nigerian University, Okada. He is also my guest on the show today. Professor Osaghae, welcome to One-to-One.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, sir. It's a real pleasure. A real pleasure. So who is Professor Eghosa Osaghae? Tell us a bit more about yourself. I'm sure there's plenty left.
Thank you very much. There's not much left. Eghosa Osaghae is the son of a headmaster from Benin, headmaster who had an experiment to perform to show that he could do many things in record time. So he wanted a child who would go to school, be a graduate at, such an early age and be everything that he wanted to be. So he sent me way ahead of time to primary school. And then I end up, graduating at 19. I end up, getting a master's at 21. And getting a PhD at 26. And his experiment, was fulfilled. And I became a full professor at 34. And it's been all that and more. So I'm sure he died a very happy and fulfilled man. So Eghosa Osaghae is the son of a headmaster, the father of 4 children, the husband of 1 wife, and grandfather of 3 children.
Indeed, a very fulfilled life you've led so far, albeit a rather precocious one. And of course, your father's experiment was a bit more than an experiment, actually. I see here the manifestation of that, proof of that experiment here before us. And of course, the NIIA, the institute that you have led since 2021, has been or is currently the direct beneficiary of that wealth of experience and expertise that you've gained over the years. But can I ask you, therefore, to talk a bit more about the overall mission? I know you alluded to it earlier, of the NIIA, and its place, its role in Nigeria today. Has that changed, morphed a bit over the years, and how? What role do you think it plays today in guiding foreign policy objectives in this country?
The NIIA was established in November 1961, which means the NIIA is 64 years old. From inception, it had the mandate, of promoting the understanding of the international community and the environment. It was to be at the vanguard of Nigeria's knowledge of other parts of the world, especially through countries and the citizens, and so on. Now, to advise the federal government on foreign policy and international relations engagements, and to produce intellectual depth, through collaborations with like-minded institutions across the world. Also to build capacities, for all of our foreign policy and international affairs engagements. So to a large extent, I think the NIIA has proven its mettle and met all of these challenges, that have come with that mandate. Now, in the 1970s especially, you would have heard that Nigeria was at the zenith of its foreign policy postures across the world. Nigeria emerged as a formidable power, leading not just African power, but a power of global reckoning. And the NIIA had a large part to play in that. Now, remember that in 1976, in January, I think, General Murtala Muhammad at the time went to the OAU summit where he delivered an address, that is today celebrated as the transition point for Nigerian foreign policy. After all that Tafawa Balewa and so on had done, he called it, it was the dawn of a new era. Africa had come of age. Now, that was the high point of a trajectory of foreign policy engagements that dated back to the very first foreign policy minister we had in this country, who was our first prime minister also, Alhaji Sir Tafawa Balewa, who, as it turns out, was one of the founding fathers of the NIIA. So he, together with Louis Mbanefo and Kashim Ibrahim, and Dito Kumbo Ademola and Simeon Adebo. These were the foreign policy elites at the time. They got together and decided to establish the NIIA. And for good midwifing, they had contacted the Royal Institute for International Affairs in England, which is Chatham House. So Chatham House boasts today of being one of the forebears of the NIIA, along with the Indian Council for World Affairs. So by the 70s, the NIIA, was at the zenith, of its contributions to Nigeria's emergence as a strong country. It was following that foundation that Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, who was Director General of the Institute at the time, then could go to town, doing the kinds of things that only the Kissingers, were doing for America. So he led the way, for instance, with the notion of a concert of medium powers, which in today's metamorphosis you would find as the BRICS or the Mint, and so on. So this was a concert of medium powers. The whole idea was to say, in the context of the Cold War, there were two great powers, a bipolar world, but there was room for the emerging powers, and they also needed to assert themselves in an evolving global order. So Bolaji Akinyemi went on to be Nigeria's Minister of External Affairs, and people who take that, very strongly would know that Bolaji Akinyemi sort of, reinvented the wheel for our foreign policy. And how more lucky would the country be? Because, we had also Professor Gambari, Ibrahim Gambari, who had been DG of the NIIA and also became Minister of Foreign Affairs. So it tells you how very closely tied the affairs of the Institute were to our foreign policy and how highly government regarded that. And I'll say that in terms of its intellectual contributions, the NIIA hasn't just only been Nigerian in scope and character. It's also been at the vanguard of the African movements for international engagements. So in 1985, for instance, the NIIA worked with other think tanks in Africa, together with the ECA, the Economic Commission for Africa, to produce a document called the African Alternative to Structural Adjustment. It was in 1985. Earlier than that, in 1981, 82, the NIIA was part of the Lagos Plan of Action, which defined, what roles there would be for Africa at the time. And to go back to the movements across time, you would see an African approach, that emphasized self-determination and, self-development in the Lagos Plan of Action. It didn't say we required autarky, so it was not like we wanted to break away from the world, but it says we should be able to determine for ourselves, what we want to do. And then you come to 1985, and structural adjustment is simply saying you no longer seem to be able to know what you want to do. Again, the NIIA is there saying, we have an alternative conception and so on. So this has been the history of the NIIA. Today, of course, things are a little more mixed. The global system is, in some kind of overdrive. Every day there's something new, and the NIIA tries to see how we can properly understand these developments and demystify the things that can be reduced to concrete, actionable points that would serve Nigeria's interest best.
So, Professor Osaghae, those are some very interesting points that you've raised. Of course, foreign policy is constantly on the move, isn't it? But of course, there are organizations like the NIIA in this country trying to ensure that that we are properly grounded and that we determine foreign policy in our own interests, of course. And I particularly love the fact that you hark back to the Cold War, the context of a polarized world, and the need for countries with other interests, the middle ground, to assert themselves. But let's fast forward a little bit from then till now and just take a look at what's happening on the African continent. I mean, it's fair to say, particularly in the last couple of years, that we've witnessed some shifting alliances, haven't we, amongst the African nations, and many of these shifts, so to speak, have implications, of course, for countries within Africa, but also, and particularly so, for Western nations. Can I ask you to just comment a little bit about that, and also to talk to us about what opportunities, economically and otherwise, that a situation that's emerging might have or offer Nigeria?
Well, thank you very much. I think the first thing to do is to provide a conceptual framework, for understanding some of the things that have happened most recently. You would find that, in not just bilateral, but also multilateral relations, a great deal of emphasis is now placed on Africa as one unit. In terms of the West, the increased importance of the European Union, which became the one voice speaking for the West, also led to efforts to deal with regional bodies like the EU itself, and so on. But still, it must be that, the world then started to think, that some of the African leaders, such as Nigeria, disappeared somewhat at a point. And that gave room, for the emphasis on Africa as a whole. So you would see that, for many international collaborators and partners, if you're not dealing with Africa as a whole, you're dealing with ECOWAS, you're dealing with SADC, you're dealing with the EAC, and so on. Now, which is not a very good thing. It's good that, regional bodies exist in Africa. They've been very effective. ECOWAS, for instance, had, when everything else failed, ECOWAS moved in Liberia and in Sierra Leone, and all that worked at Nigeria's initiative. And that's good. The whole of Southern Africa got liberated, because Nigeria was there to provide, that kind of leadership and so on. But when after South Africa became liberated, and the decolonization movement as the attainment of independence for the whole of Africa seemed to have been fully completed, there was some kind of lull, if you like. There was a recession. And I think that's when the notion of Africa as one, then took its ascendancy. But, Africa itself has never lost the point of its vanguard movement. I think President Nelson Mandela summarized it all very well. Africa is waiting for Nigeria. It is what Nigeria leads, where it leads, that Africa would go. And so that's an historical mission. It's an historical responsibility. It's not a burden, that Nigeria has. Nigerian foreign policy analysts call that Nigeria's manifest destiny, which is to lead Africa. And that hasn't disappeared at all. But here we are. Within Africa itself, the changing global dynamics have moved around two central points. Now, when we, as a continent, as countries, as regional bodies, decide these are the things we want to do, the question always is, do you have the funds? Do you have the funds to do what you want to do? Many of our states are fragile on the continent. They cannot help themselves. They are poor. They cannot even fix basic infrastructure. They are turned around, and torn apart by wars and conflicts and so on. And we don't seem to have the capacity, to help ourselves. So for a long time, Africa has been dependent on aid. And, dependence on aid can, in the short run, help to solve immediate problems of stability and so on. But you cannot rely on aid forever.
Absolutely.
And that's where we find ourselves. So today, the changing dynamics are providing the opportunity, finally, for Africa to say, look, we now have to learn to do things for ourselves, going back to the Lagos Plan of Action, the early 1980s, to say we now have to get our own agenda, such as the Agenda 2063, which the African Union now has. How do we, harness this sense? And, maybe we haven't progressed at the rate, that we would have wished, but there is everything to suggest that finally we're getting there. The African Continental Free Trade Framework, for instance, which encourages trade within African countries, is key. Just yesterday, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala was reminding us that take Lesotho. Lesotho produces jeans trousers, jeans materials. It's a heavy textile country. But none of the jeans it produces comes to Africa. They are smuggled to African countries, but the things are targeted at, the U.S. market. Now, but with the tariffs that have been imposed now on Lesotho, is 40% on goods from Lesotho. Perhaps the jeans, textiles
will find their way
to Africa. And, for Nigeria, it's a big opportunity. If you go around Africa, whether you're in the Congo, or you're in Senegal, or you're in Ghana, or you're in South Africa, or you're in Kenya, you find Nigerian banks. And they are thriving. They are doing very well. This is not internal colonialism. This is not imperialism of the external kind. It's something that, can easily resonate well with everyone. These are, our people and so on. And look at the kinds of things that Dangote has done using the cement sector across Africa, from Egypt to Mozambique and everywhere. The Dangote network is very strong. Overall, I would say that these opportunities that are on offer also carry the risks, of the things that we've not been able to deal with. Insecurity, for instance, issues of poverty, infrastructural decay, because you must recognize that if you are doing very well domestically, your foreign policy would also reflect it. So if you have challenges that you're not able to address within, you will muddle through. You may not be as assertive as you should be. So that's the situation with many countries in Africa, including South Africa, including Egypt, including Kenya, and so on. So we find ourselves at a point where we are resetting and reformatting, to be able to deal with the changing dynamics and to make optimal use of the opportunities on offer.
But in today's changing world, just thinking about soft power, some of the most influential people in this country today, and some of our greatest ambassadors are actually sportsmen, women, entertainers, and people in the world of fashion. Is there something to be said for co-opting these sorts of individuals, creating a framework for them to do what they do best on behalf of the country?
The point that you just made about soft power diplomacy is something that for us at the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, we have acknowledged. Actually, we now have a unit, we have a desk that deals with sports diplomacy. It is headed by Ambassador Segun Odegbami, mathematical. And he has raised the status of sports diplomacy, in unimaginable ways. Now, he talks about soft power diplomacy using sports, but he also says it's a major revenue earner today. Now, we talk of funds from diaspora communities and so on, but the money in sports, it's huge. And, because of the large number of Nigerians who are involved in that, it's a gold mine that we can use. But, if you take Akeem Olajuwon was a pioneer in the NBA for basketball.
Houston Rockets.
Now, he is one of the closest people to the Bush family in Texas. So what greater leverage would anybody, desire, than having a Hakeem Olajuwon, on your side? That's soft power. Now, if you go around the UK or you go to Saudi Arabia, the director of the international recruitment of footballers, the revolutionary era in Saudi Arabia, is a Nigerian. Now, all over the world, in American football and everywhere, we have all of those people. Now, you're saying, how do we harness this? We have a diaspora commission, that has been working very hard, to see how we can optimize the strategic deployments and uses, of these kinds of things. And I can tell you that many of these people have opened doors where it has been necessary to do to unbelievable levels. So even in the absence of a very coherent framework for dealing with, for engaging, our sportsmen and women, they've been put to great use. Now, take the artists, the creative artists, or Nollywood itself. I mean, I don't know how many times you've been in shops around the world, and the music everyone is playing is Nigerian music.
Absolutely.
I mean, and this is, music is universal. The language is so neutral. They don't need to speak the language. Everywhere, including countries where English is not spoken, they know all our musicians, the great people. They invite them. The Indian the other day who was having the biggest wedding ceremony ever in history. Nigerians. They see the World Cup, competitions. There are Nigerian artists. It tells you what clout we have, and this clout is not isolated. It's not unfounded. It's not unknown. The world has always recognized the creative genius of Nigerians. everywhere. I mean, one of the things that the world has come to know about Nigeria is the fact that, all the Shoyinka, the Achebe, the Chimamanda, all of these great creative artists, they've come from Nigeria. If you take the Booker writing competition, the literature prizes and so on, it's almost become a Nigerian monopoly. So the world recognizes that all over the world. I mean, the other day I was going through a directory, of researchers in specialized fields, even in the sciences, and Nigerians featured. So there's a great deal, and that's why the world has not, come so fully against Nigeria on account of the mishaps that have come through the bad image that the country has had in the last few decades, over internet fraud, and those kinds of things, because they know that those are not the hallmarks of the true Nigerians. The true Nigerians are entrepreneurial, they're industrious, they are hardworking people, they are the best at everything that they do, and that's obvious. Absolutely. I mean, just think of the number of Nigerians that play in the different English leagues. Just think of the number of Nigerians. And by the way, we have also used our soft power diplomacy in a manner that many people don't also recognize. But here, let me be also historically accurate. That when we talked about the technical aid corps, it was something that was recommended to government by the Professor Bolaji Akinyemi when he was DG of the NIIA. And we've used it. I mean, so if you go across Africa, you would find that many of the science teachers in countries like Rwanda and Burundi and Uganda and so on, mathematics teachers and so on, Nigerians. There are Nigerian pharmacists. So everywhere, the technical aid corps has been spot on, for Nigeria. And these are the kinds of things that countries appreciate and acknowledge when they say that Nigeria is a clear African leader. And don't forget, that until today, we support countries, for elections and so on. We do things that a big African power, should be doing.
And on that note, Professor Eghosa Osaghae, it has been an immense pleasure, a most informative conversation I've had with you today. It has been a privilege to talk to you in one-to-one. Thank you so very much, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right.